In his 1516 book Utopia, Sir Thomas More imagined a society where everyone received a guaranteed income. This is often pointed at by many as one of the first examples of universal basic income, or UBI. Can you imagine such a society? We would all get free money to cover our basic necessities, leaving us with more room to explore our passions. Sounds pretty sweet, right? But would that actually work in the real world?
Welcome to Alux.com, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired.
There have been many arguments for and against a universal basic income, with a few countries trying out their own UBI experiments. However, while many entertain the idea, most countries still look at it with skepticism. So today, we'd like to go over the concept of universal basic income, its pros and cons, and a few real-world experiments in order to answer the question, should we all get free money? Okay, to start, what is UBI? If you've ever played Monopoly, then you're probably familiar with the phrase, pass go and collect $200. Well, that's a lot like the universal basic income. Okay, that's obviously an oversimplification, but there are some similarities between UBI and the famous board game.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Just like in Monopoly, with UBI, everyone gets the same amount of money to work with more payments coming down the line. At its core, basic universal income is a cash payment given to every individual without any specific conditions. That means it doesn't matter how much money you make or how little, we all get the same payment. This is sometimes called full basic income, if the payment is enough to cover all basic needs, or partial basic income if it isn't. It might sound similar to existing programs that benefit the poor, unemployed, or the elderly. But since those have specific conditions and requirements, they're not exactly UBI. Now, let's travel back in time to that terrible year, 2020. The restrictions and lockdowns brought on by the pandemic made a lot of people lose their jobs. With many around the world struggling to make ends meet, a lot of governments provided cash payments to their citizens to help them manage during the pandemic. Hong Kong, Canada, Germany, Italy, India, and the US were some of the places where these cash payments were implemented. Because of this, many consider the pandemic as sort of a perfect example of the necessity of a universal basic income. One such individual is Andrew Yang, who ran as a Democratic Party candidate for president in 2020 and for the New York City mayor's office in 2021. Universal basic income was one of the main pillars of his campaign for US president and New York City mayor. Regarding the inability to pay for housing during the pandemic, Yang said, 30% or more of Americans couldn't afford housing costs last month, and that's with extended unemployment benefits and other measures. So we need to think much bigger about how we can make this economy work for so many Americans. And to me, that starts with putting economic relief directly into their hands. But the pandemic isn't the only reason why people are calling for UBI nowadays. With the growing rise of automation, people are worried that robots will take our jobs. Okay, we know that's not exactly how it works, but there are concerns about the necessity of certain jobs in an increasingly automated world. With UBI, we could move away from a model where jobs are a requirement to live. And that's the heart of universal basic income, giving people some relief for their day-to-day necessities, protection from unexpected events, and the freedom to choose what they want to do with their lives without having to worry so much about how they'll afford to live. But of course, there are some pros and cons. In the book Utopia, the characters discuss the way thieves are hanged over their crimes during their dinner conversation. On this topic, one of them states, "No penalty on earth will stop people from stealing if it's their only way of getting food. Instead of inflicting these horrible punishments, it would be far more to the point to provide everyone with some means of livelihood, so that nobody's under the frightful necessity of becoming first a thief and then a corpse." Chilling words, right? While we aren't going around hanging thieves anymore, the basic idea of their argument still stands. If we give everyone money so they can take care of their basic needs, they wouldn't have to worry about how to survive or resort to committing crimes to do so. But sadly, things are never so simple. Otherwise, we would all be sitting around sipping margaritas all day. While there are many proposed benefits to universal basic income, there are likewise a few drawbacks that analysts have pointed out. In the corner of supporters, they've pointed out how UBI could reduce poverty levels and income income equality, improve mental health, fight technological unemployment, and eliminate the need for a social safety net. Now, the boost to mental health that comes from not having to worry about how you'll survive every month is undeniable and has been proven with existing UBI trials. However, there are some who propose that UBI could actually worsen inequality, since it would also give people who already have more resources the same money. As well, it could incentivize people to vote in leaders who promise them more money. In the corner of detractors, we have claims that UBI would be too expensive, that it would remove people's motivation to work, and it could actually increase inequality. Let's be honest, the cost of implementing a UBI would be significant. For example, in the US, it's estimated it would take a whopping $2.8 trillion per year just to give every citizen a payment of $1,000 a month. However, we would also need to consider the current cost of social programs that would be made redundant if UBI was a thing. As for the motivation point, well, it's hard to argue that many wouldn't want to work if they didn't need to, but that doesn't necessarily mean they would just sit around doing nothing. Without the necessity of work, people might take more interest in bettering their education and collaborating with their society in other ways. But like we said, this is already played out in a couple of locations, so let's look at some real-world examples. To really answer our question, we can't just look at the pros and cons in a vacuum, and luckily for us, we don't have to. Many countries have already experimented with UBI, and we can look at their own results to have an idea of the effectiveness on this proposal. Let's start with the state of Alaska in the US. Did you know the state pays everyone an annual dividend? They've been doing this since 1982 through the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is supported by oil revenues. The amount isn't fixed, as it's based on current oil prices, but it's ranged from $1,000 to $2,000 in the past. Did people stop working because of that? Not at all. Economists investigated the result of the program and found it didn't have any effect on employment. It did, however, lead to a 20% reduction in poverty rates and families having more kids. Canada has tried the program twice, in the province of Manitoba between 1974 and 1979, and more recently in the province of Ontario between 2017 and 2018. In both cases, people saw a boost in mental and physical health, but both projects were canned once a more conservative candidate came into power. One example of the program running at a nationwide level is Iran. The country first implemented a UBI back in 2011 to compensate for the elimination of some subsidies. It was later dialed back as some people felt it lowered the motivation to work, but studies actually found that to not be the case. Other countries that have performed UBI trials include Kenya, Spain, Germany, Finland, Brazil, and the Netherlands. So, to wrap all of this up, should we all get free money? Well, it's hard to say for sure. We've taken a stance against UBI in the past, but seeing how it's unfolded in some locations kind of makes us curious. Plus, imagine being able to focus more on personal projects and work that's more fulfilling to you. Adding to that, the fact we've already seen it can work. Universal basic income might not be the solution to all of our problems, but it sounds like a step in an interesting direction. Implementing it would require some work, of course, but if we look at existing models, we'll have a good frame of reference to build from. So what's your take on UBI, Alexer? Do you think it's a wise move or a crisis waiting to happen? Share your thoughts in the comments. We always love hearing what you have to say. And as a bonus, here's a fun fact. The next place to try a true universal basic income will be the autonomous Spanish region of Catalonia, which is looking to test a 2-year pilot program in 2022. The specific amount of money hasn't been zeroed in yet, but they're considering something between 900 and 1,350 euros per person, all paid for by the Catalan government. Only time will tell how well it works, and if other countries will follow suit.